Hello Berlin, Love Parade. I like to present the sub-harmonic sound.
The what sound? Sub-harmonic?
You need to be a piano player, an organist and a string player in one person, and you need to be a virtuoso in all three of those. And on top of that, you need to be an engineer and a physicist as well.
He provides a kind of archetype of the lone scientist beavering away while the world spins by.
It was a box, only wood, nothing in, empty.
The Trautonium was another strange, quite obscure and difficult to find multi-complex instrument. It's got those bendy keys that can really be expressive.
He's really into technology and he's into surround sound, and he really enjoys it when he can hear his own music on the best available system. When he talks to you afterwards, he's got these shining eyes and he's like, "Oh, I've never heard my music like this before."
Der Deutschen Bundespost.
I know the Moog, the Korg, and all the other new and old synthesizers. I can even recognise a Wurlitzer organ, but a Trautonium? Well, I watched a video the other day and discovered that it's not some kind of posh aquarium for trout, but a German electronic instrument that's got a growing band of fans in its home country and abroad. But then the shocks came. The first one, the origins of this instrument go back 70 years. Its creator and guardian angel, Oskar Sala, is even older. He turned 90 this year. And the second, he's one of the hottest properties on the German youth scene. For instance, he played his music at last year's Eclipse in front of 500,000 people.
Young people come to him and pack him in the back of their car and drive him off to some rave event. He puts on some of his records and tapes there and comes back home and says, "I'm not quite sure where I was. It was terribly loud, but I really enjoyed it." He's around young people at the moment all the time. I mean, people come to visit him. He gives guided tours of his Trautonium kingdom to everybody who wants to know, really.
Georg Misch, a young filmmaker whose documentary first alerted me to Oskar Sala's existence.
Meine Damen und Herren, in meinem Programm steht jetzt, es steht eben, also ich meine, ich habe auch nicht die Zeiten so durchgerechnet. Da steht jetzt noch eine Dia-Vorführung, die die Geschichte so
But why this interest in Sala and Trautonium now? How many other 90-year-olds do you know that work in pop?
It seems to coincide with the general interest in vintage synthesizers and sort of retro sounds. There's a lot of interest in old synthesizer and Moogs and all kinds of vintage synthesizers. I mean, everything that's more than 5 years old nowadays for a synthesizer is a vintage synthesizer. But in that respect, the Trautonium is the original vintage synthesizer.
People were bored by the very cool and clean sound of the digital instruments, and they wanted to take the quality of analog sound and apply digital parameters on it.
Sala is a virtuoso, almost by necessity, being the only person who plays his instrument. He'd have to be a virtuoso, and that's always attractive, and it's especially attractive at a time when electronics in general seems to have removed people from the realm of performance.
Ed Baxter, who runs the experimental group London Musicians Collective, and before him, Felix Kubin, a Hamburg-based audio artist. So nostalgia perhaps, but there's something else as well that Sala's Trautonium offers today's musicians.
It is an instrument to play.
That seems obvious, but there's more to it.
The most amazing thing, surprisingly, about it being an electronic instrument is not really the electronic side, but the playing possibilities that it offers the performer, because it's basically two manuals with strings and keys, which offers you microtonality. It offers you the possibility to do amazing glissandi, but on the other hand, it also has an amazing dynamic range. You can move from piano to fortissimo in a fraction of a second and with incredible attack and strength.
This instrument has virtually no limits.
Unlike so many digital and computer-driven sound contraptions, the Trautonium offers a quality that most old-fashioned instruments have. It's instinctive. It may have lots of dials and switches, chords and patch bays, just like an old telephone exchange, but the bit that you play on is a reassuringly familiar combination of a string stretched horizontally, a keyboard and 2 pedals. And, as Pete Namlook, the last voice we heard there, said, this combination seems to have no limits. But then, Namlook would say that, wouldn't he? Over the last few years, he's become the main promoter and user of Trautonium in the German pop world, and, some would say, Sala's heir. He's also the only person that I know of, other than Sala, who regularly plays a Trautonium in his concerts. Others are not so taken with all this looking into the past. Georg Odijk, who runs the cutting-edge A-Music Records in Cologne, had no doubts when I asked him if people on his label showed any interest in all this vintage gear.
No, at the moment not. So I think it was maybe interesting 5 or 6 years ago, but I think at the moment the people are more into new technologies.
It's a kind of quaint machine, isn't it, compared to the sampler, which everyone can buy on the high street these days. And it has the feel of an antique, of a museum piece about it already. It's already been superseded by thousands of other machines. People discovered the electric guitar instead. It's a dead end, really, isn't it?
Dead end? Sala doesn't think so, especially when the Trautonium's compared with the modern synthesizer.
He's laughing at synthesizers because they're really cop-outs. They're not comparable at all to what is possible with his instrument.
So is the Trautonium a sort of grandfather of all the Korgs and Yamahas that everyone has today?
No. The Trautonium is much over the synthesizers. The synthesizers have no this possibility. They have no sub-harmonic sounds. They have no the possibility to play one chord, 4 voices, or 3 voices, or glissando. No synthesizer. Synthesizers are now a very old possibility.
It's one step ahead in the terms of natural sound and natural harmonics. So the chords being performed on the Trautonium have a natural feel to it, because these kinds of sounds exist in nature as well. And these kind of chords you cannot create on a Korg or a Yamaha, because they are all dedicated to chromatic scales. They are all dedicated to the equal division of an octave into 12 parts.
So what's all this sub-harmonic magic about?
This is the possibility to have sounds from the undertones.
Sounds like underworld. But seriously, I know what the harmonics are. Every note you play or sing is in fact a combination of the loudest bit, the fundamental, and lots of softer sounds higher up, the harmonics. They're called harmonics because the distance between them always follows a predetermined pattern that people thought of as harmonious. But the sub-harmonics?
The sub-harmonics is something which theoretically is known since many hundred years, but it could never be achieved on an acoustical instrument. It's a physical impossibility. On the Trautonium, however, and with Sala's circuits, which are patented to him, he's got a patent for his sub-harmonic generator. You can actually generate the mirror image to the harmonics, the sub-harmonics, and he's using those in his music. And it's actually, they create very interesting intervals. And it's a tonal system which is unique to the Trautonium and to Sala's music. It doesn't exist in any other instrument.
To be honest, most musicians could not care less if the instrument they use produces harmonics or sub-harmonics, left harmonics or even philharmonics. They want to know what it sounds like and what it's like to play.
It is very direct, because the distance that you go through, if you press your finger down the string onto the plate and the plate moves downwards, you have like 1.5 centimeter. And if you do the same with the aftertouch on a keyboard, it's ridiculous. You cannot really adjust what you are doing. You can only roughly make some things louder or open a filter or something like that. But with a Trautonium, you have the full control over the tone in one finger.
Here I have Techno-Kraftwerk, and here I have my instrument.
Kraftwerk visited him ages ago. I think they probably took their own influence from that, their own inspiration. But if you listen at Kraftwerk's music, you can't really see an influence. There might have been influence to some degree. I think everybody who meets him is inspired by him, but I think in musical terms, the end result is not really visible.
Kraftwerk were the famous visitors to Sala's Berlin studios in the 1970s, as were those other leaders of German electronica, Tangerine Dream. But I can't hear any obvious Sala influence in their music. So here is Oskar Sala doing a bit of Kraftwerk remixing of his own. So what did Kraftwerk and Tangerine Dream want from him?
Naja, she wants the sound possibilities, but I think it's not possible in this style. I have heard 3 years later there was a demonstration, and I thought, no, also from mixture Trautonium is not very much to hear.
I've already mentioned Pete Namlook and his enormous passion for Trautonium. But if Sala's influence is so hard to detect in Kraftwerk and Tangerine Dream, how can I be sure that it's not the same case with Namlook?
With many of the records, I mean, you can see the influence because they're entitled Sub-harmonic something. They're, I don't know, Sub-harmonic interference, or they have Sub-harmonic or even Trautonium in the title, his pieces. He's the only one that I've heard so far where I can hear the Trautonium, where I can hear Oskar Sala as well. You can hear the warmth of the instrument. You know, the Trautonium has an extremely warm and human quality to it somehow. That's exactly the weird thing about it, because it's an electronic instrument, but it's as unelectronic in its sound as I can imagine. And there's that in some of those Namlook pieces.
The more I hear the Trautonium, the more I can see its potential. But I'm also more and more puzzled why it took so long for Sala to be discovered by pop musicians. After all, there were times, in the 1930s and then again in the 50s and 60s, when the world at large did take notice of the sub-harmonic wizard from the Berlin suburb.
One problem came with Sala himself, because at a certain time in the 60s, when he had big success in film music and so on, he was not very communicative to others about the Trautonium and did not widely wanted to share his knowledge about this instrument. And so it was hidden away. After a while, I think around the time when I met him, he started to understand that as soon as he will die, this instrument and the knowledge and the music will die with him. And so he started to communicate more with journalists, with other musicians, and so on. I hope it is not too late, but this should have started 10 years earlier, so we would have Trautoniums being built by Yamaha and Roland and so on, you know?
I'll come back to the problems of building new Trautoniums in a moment, but what I keep wondering is, how on earth did Sala make ends meet?
Just with his music alone, Sala couldn't have really survived all these years, and I think his main source of income and work was films, really. The Birds comes to hand. I mean, that was the big blockbuster that he did, and something that pulled him out of obscurity into the limelight and fame again, and something that he cherishes. I mean, in his studio he's got photographs with him and Hitchcock all over the walls. But apart from that, he did some B-movie type of German horror movies where he sort of produced weird sounds for.
And this doesn't go unnoticed even amongst today's youngest generation.
He made a lot of music also for the industry, and some pieces I heard from industry films or for spots I also found really great.
He gets up in the morning, goes down 7 flights of stairs because his flat is on the 7th floor, there's no elevator. Then has a 20-minute foot walk to his studio, goes to his studio, starts working, works until early afternoon, walks back to his flat, has lunch, probably a little nap, and then in the afternoon he goes down the stairs again to the studio and continues working until late at night, 2 o'clock in the morning. And that's his daily routine, 7 days a week, probably since 70 years.
Yeah, I think it is a long time without a result.
It would be different if one could pick up a Trautonium for 10 quid in a junk shop. You know, everyone would be. We'd find out then if it were usable, if anyone could use it. But that doesn't happen.
Well, I can't pick up a Trautonium for a tenner. In fact, the rebuilding cost has been estimated at over £300,000. But there is a growing momentum to bring this instrument into the digital and MIDI domains.
There are some people around who are trying to develop a Trautonium-style controller, which is basically mechanically comparable to what he's got on his instrument, and then to translate that into MIDI signals, and then you could connect it to any kind of tone generator, any kind of synthesizer sampler, whatever you wanted. And I think that would be really exciting, because I think then it wouldn't be very expensive, I think, because it's just one piece of kit. And then I think people could just buy it and potter around on it at home and actually try to play stuff. And I think it would be amazing to see what would happen then.
I know that people like the Swedish firm Klavier have been working on this for some time, but with mixed results. So what could be the problem? I can see that one is that amazing dynamic range which Georg mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it's one part, and the other part also the tonal range. If you sweep down the string, you can go from very high to a tone that only pluckers. Yeah. And in the MIDI domain, you cannot replicate a thing like that very easily. There are a lot of limitations that come with digital, and I had quite some struggle to create my Trautonium chords on synthesizer equipment. And I need two computers to simulate a similar thing, and I still, if I make several progressions on the keyboard, I'm limited to the chromatic progression, but play sub-harmonic sounds, and this is only, you know, a crude compromise.
Dieter Döpfer, who's a manufacturer of analog synthesizers in Munich, he's been looking into the Trautonium technology for quite a while now. I mean, he is already selling a sub-harmonic module, so you can buy a sub-harmonic plug-in for your analog synthesizer that generates sub-harmonic scales and works in a way similar to Sala's instrument, but it's nothing without the controller. And Döpfer has been trying to build the same kind of manual for a while, but he hasn't really succeeded to find a construction that's commercially viable.
And then, a little time later, she came to me and says, yes, we have made a plan for an instrument with our new technique. And our new technique is the microelectronic. This is here, this instrument. And they have built this, and it's come to me, and saying, yeah, so we have now 20 volts or 25.
In fact, Zala's old Trautonium was so fragile that it had to be moved to a museum to be preserved. And what he has in his studio is a 1980s improvement constructed by students from a German postal communications college. They replaced a lot of the old valves with microelectronics and made the whole thing work with much lower voltage. So Oskar is not so much in danger of an unwanted electric shock. But if it's too difficult to mass produce Trautoniums, how about just sampling it? I asked Adrian Utley from the Bristol band Portishead, and a man who's heavily into all kinds of electronic music.
I'd almost feel like it was like stealing somehow to sample for somebody like Oskar Sala. I don't know why, because it's so intensely personal. To take a lump of it would be, and just use it in something else. It would be cool. I don't think I'd do it.
With everything around us being increasingly driven towards computerization and digits, does it mean that that's the only option open to the Trautonium in the future?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, I find it, for example, interesting to take analog sounds, which are much more warm and unstable, they're more lively, and to cut and paste them with hardcore recording, with digital means. The analog instruments give you a much faster possibility to change the sound. You don't have to go through the menus all the time, and also the instability and the possibility of errors that happen are really important for me in music.
Nobody got to that point to use the same Trautonium as Oskar Sala's with other waveforms. There's a lot of potential still in this instrument, although it is rather perfect with just the sawtooth and the noise. What I can do from my side, and what I will do in the future, is to play more and more Trautonium on my recordings, on my CDs. And I think the more I will do that, the more musicians will be interested in it. And there would be then, perhaps one time, enough demand that a synthesizer company, a producer of these instruments, would be interested to really do a serious job on it.
So instrument manufacturers, take note. because there's still a lot to be said for the combination of a man, his mistakes and ideas, and a musical instrument, old or new.
Electronic music of this kind, nonsense first class.